Let's jump right in. We're unpacking a massive, high-profile economic clash today between one of the world's wealthiest men and local government leaders over how to actually help working-class Americans. So if you're a curious college student diving into public policy, or honestly, just someone trying to make sense of our wild economic landscape, consider this your essential explainer. We are looking at a fierce, high-stakes debate over who should pay what, completely centered around the idea of overhauling the American tax system.
Our agenda for this briefing covers the zero tax proposal, visualizing the tax divide, the billionaire versus the mayor, the K-shaped economy, and finally, the hidden tax burden.
Section 1. The Zero Tax Proposal. We're kicking things off with a pretty bold proposition that totally challenges the usual economic platforms on both sides of the political aisle. Amazon executive chair Jeff Bezos recently went on CNBC and argued that the bottom half of earners in America shouldn't pay federal income taxes at all. He literally said he thinks it should be zero. He noted that even if you double the taxes he personally pays, it's not going to magically help a struggling nurse or teacher. Instead, his argument is that we shouldn't be asking a nurse in Queens to send her money to Washington in the first place. If anything, he says, the government should be sending her an apology.
It's really fascinating to look at where he's coming from on this. Bezos actually brought it back to his own roots, emphasizing a genuine desire to give struggling earners a leg up by simply wiping out their tax bill entirely. He talked about his own family's humble beginnings, having a Cuban immigrant father and a mother who gave birth at 17, and how they had to bring themselves up. For him, completely removing that income tax burden for the bottom 50% is a powerful, direct way to help today's lower-income Americans do the exact same thing.
Section 2. Visualizing the tax divide.
Now, when we break down the math on federal revenue, we can see exactly what's at stake if this zero-tax policy were to actually happen. Bezos points out that the bottom half of taxpayers currently provide about 3% of federal revenue. 3%. For the government, that's just a drop in the bucket. But compare that to the massive 40% shouldered by the top 1%. From his perspective, sacrificing that tiny 3% slice of government revenue is a pretty minor trade-off that would deliver a massive, immediate financial boost to working-class families.
And to put that into perspective, the resource gap here is just absolutely vast. Look at 2023. The top 1% earned an average of at least $676,000, while the bottom half averaged just under $54,000. So eliminating the income tax for that bottom half would shift the entire income tax burden onto the top 50%. Paradoxically, and tax experts are quick to point this out, this idea pushed by a billionaire would actually make our already progressive tax system even more progressive.
Section 3. The billionaire vs. mayor.
So, if cutting taxes for the bottom half sounds like a total win-win, why are local politicians fiercely demanding wealth redistribution instead? Well, we've got a massive clash here. Bezos argues that heavily taxing billionaires is essentially just picking a villain and pointing fingers, a political wedge issue that doesn't actually put money in a worker's pocket. But then you have critics like New York City Mayor Zohran Mamdani stepping in. Mamdani champions higher taxes on the wealthy, including a proposed pied-à-terre tax for part-time luxury residents. And he argues the exact opposite of Bezos. For leaders like Mamdani, taxing billionaires is exactly the mechanism that funds the essential public services, the schools, and the infrastructure that those teachers in Queens literally rely on every single day.
Now, a super common counter-argument to Mamdani's wealth tax push is that if you tax billionaires too much, they'll just pack up and leave. But the data tells a completely different, really surprising story. Manhattan's ultra-luxury real estate market is booming right now. In May alone, sales of apartments priced over $10 million saw a massive 80% year-over-year surge. And that's right in the middle of all this intense political rhetoric about taxing the rich.
Yeah, that whole wealth flight narrative, the facts are strongly contradicting it. Major financial institutions and billionaires are still pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into New York City real estate. For example, billionaire Ken Griffin just bought a $238 million penthouse. That is the most expensive private home sale in U.S. history. And despite his public disagreements with the mayor, he signaled he's still moving forward with a massive new office tower. On top of that, corporate giants like JP Chase and American Express are committing to huge new headquarters in Manhattan. So clearly, high-end capital isn't rushing for the exits just yet.
Section 4. The K-shaped economy.
Okay, to truly grasp this debate between tax relief and wealth redistribution, we need to zoom out a bit. Experts point out that we are currently living in what's known as a K-shaped economy. Bezos himself called this a tale of two economies. Think of the letter K. The upper arm represents higher-income households who are doing incredibly well. They're riding the wave of rising stock markets and solid wage growth. But that downward arm? That represents lower-income consumers who are facing incredibly severe financial strain right now.
For those Americans struggling on that downward curve, the economic pressures are compounding incredibly fast. The Federal Reserve Bank of New York notes that when pandemic-era subsidies expired, it created a massive financial divergence. Throw in broader inflation and sharply higher gasoline prices, and it's a perfect storm. Because let's be real, lower earners spend a much greater percentage of their income on basic necessities like gas compared to the wealthy. They are being squeezed tight. And it really raises the question, is a simple income tax cut actually enough to counter these heavy everyday macroeconomic forces?
Section 5. The hidden tax burden. This brings us to the absolute most complex part of our explainer. Looking beyond just the federal income tax reveals a major twist. Some tax experts, like the folks at the Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy, argue that Bezos' zero tax proposal sounds a lot more grandiose than it actually is. Why? Well, here's the kicker. A massive portion of the working class, specifically the bottom 40%, already effectively pays $0 in federal income tax on average. That's thanks to standard deductions and refundable tax credits already baked into the system. These experts argue the real issue isn't the income tax on the poor, it's the favorable treatment of the wealthiest corporations and individuals. They point out, for instance, that Amazon itself reaped $17.4 billion in federal tax breaks in 2025.
The true hidden burden of the American tax system lies in how it's structured. While the federal income tax is progressive, other everyday taxes are heavily regressive. Take payroll taxes, which fund Social Security. That's the biggest levy a lot of working people pay. But high earners? They stop paying that tax entirely on any income above $184,500. On top of that, state and local sales taxes consume a dramatically larger chunk of a low-income family's budget. So make no mistake, lower-income Americans are still paying heavily into the system. It's just happening at the cash register and on their pay stubs, not necessarily through their federal income tax return.
When you roll it all together, accounting for all of those hidden taxes combined across federal, state, and local levels, the picture shifts again. The top 1% accounts for about 24% of total tax revenue, and that actually closely aligns with their 20% share of the nation's reported income. But of course, progressive think tanks are very quick to point out a huge caveat. That 20% income figure does not include untaxed, unrealized capital gains from stocks and assets, which are disproportionately hoarded by the ultra-wealthy. So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder while you evaluate these competing economic philosophies. On one hand, you have this billionaire-backed push to completely relieve the bottom half of their federal income tax burden to help them rise up. On the other hand, you've got local government leaders fighting tooth and nail to tax extreme wealth to fund the very systems that support those workers, backed by data showing the high-end markets aren't collapsing under the pressure. If simply cutting income tax won't fix the K-shaped economy on its own, and taxing billionaires doesn't automatically cause them to pack their bags, what is the right formula to fund the country's future? Think about it. Thanks for joining me on this policy briefing, and keep asking the big questions.